drive. So this post all of the suspension overhaul work that I completed last year. The car hasn't actually travelled that far since, and also post recent oil, and despite what the dashboard says, it's very likely because we only have around 32 to 33,000 miles from new, and also because we have a nice and tight little suspension setup. Now, the one thing that a lot of younger Micra owners like to do is to ditch the existing suspension and go with coil-over setup, which is all well and good. Also lowering kits as well, you know, something perfectly acceptable as long as you get everything geometry-wise checked out properly and you fit the relevant adjustable panhard rod. However, if you have a standard Micra and you don't really want to spend too much on suspension upgrades, I can highly recommend just upgrading the standard suspension with brand new components. So we're talking about bushes for the front anti-roll bars, we're talking about the drop links, we're talking about the front wishbones, we're also talking about shocks, top mounts, springs, rear shocks and rear springs. All in all, the total for that little haul, parts wise, for parts alone, came in at around £500. Now, I can see why a lot of people would go for a coil-over setup, I mean generally, or sort of a lowering setup, because the actual parts are available slightly cheaper, I believe. However, if you want to keep the car's original handling characteristics and you don't want a crashy, bumpy ride, which you may get with some of the lowering options, I can highly recommend going the standard factory route. Out of the factory, the car was very capable and did sort of win a number of magazine awards in its time for its sort of driving appeal. It is a car that is very much, despite its sort of small diminutive size and some low power output, I feel it is quite a driver's car. It is, to use a cliched phrase, it does sort of handle very well like a go-kart, you could say, but it's also quite compliant as well. The ride isn't too crashy. It's not especially comfortable for long journeys, but then again it is just a small little car. But it's perfectly acceptable, certainly for around town work and shorter journeys, when you sort of go further afield, it's absolutely fine. However, you do find, certainly I find, after around sort of 200 miles or so, you will find yourself getting a little bit fatigued. I mean, it can sort of become quite tiresome after a while. So, in a second, I was going to use the motorway to go to where I'm going, but I think I'm going to take some interesting country back roads. So we now find us on some B roads, and I'm using the CVT's peak torque point, which is at 4,000 RPM, to accelerate us up to 50 miles an hour. Oh, the heady speeds that we are reaching in this car. But the main thing is, it gets there, and it will sit there quite comfortably. Now, we are going to be coming up to a number of interesting little twisty parts at the moment, but communication through the steering wheel, I'm getting a lot of information about the road, not too much, but enough to know where certain undulations are, and also if the surface underfoot is getting a little bit squiffy. So we're coming up to our first corner now, and as you can see, going around quite nicely. If we select sport mode, it will hold us in that higher ratio a little bit. Dab on the brake, a little bit round, and you can really hug into the corner there. And there we are, a little burst of acceleration, but still within the speed limit. And also you get a certain degree, with that sport button, you do get a certain degree of engine braking. You will find it fairly difficult to certainly reach the limits of the vehicle. There's just really not enough power, certainly, to you know, get anywhere near the kind of limits that you would sort of think the car would be capable of. But it's a lot of fun exploring the sort of limited performance that you are afforded, certainly in this 1 litre version. So now we're just going to have a little chat about how it sits in sort of more normal scenarios. So at the minute we're doing a steady 30 miles an hour. We are in a 30 limit, and certainly on the CVT version the gearbox does seem to automatically default to almost sort of like an economy mode. It's sitting at 1500 RPM. Interesting thing that I do find about this particular car is when you are driving, when the car is cold, it does actually hold on to the revs a little bit higher for a little bit longer, so it doesn't allow you to, or allow the gearbox to engage its absolute highest ratio. So effectively the economy ratio that will be running in for the majority of the time once it's warm. The reason for this is to warm up the engine quicker and also warm up the catalyst quicker. If you've got higher temperature exhaust gases going through the exhaust system, you will warm up the catalyst quicker. You will improve emissions far quicker than you would normally if you were just sort of leaving the engine to run whilst cold, or sort of running the economy mode whilst cold. And you also can sort of reap the benefits of reduced emissions in economy, which I've already said. But those benefits, certainly in a car of this era, and you know, certainly when things were sort of becoming certainly more environmentally driven, then it was definitely very much a concern. I'm not 100% certain which Euro rating this car complies to. I want to say either Euro 2 or Euro 3. We do have on this particular example, because it's a later coil pack model, one catalyst which is right up very close to the exhaust manifold, so it gets heated up far quicker than it would normally. Now we're actually coming up to not a particularly interesting part of the road, but a part of the road where we can increase speed to 40 miles an hour. Certainly on flat terrain, you don't really need to do anything. You don't need to strain the engine. Just a little squeeze of the accelerator and you're up to 40, which for around town work is absolutely perfect. Now, in a moment, we'll be coming to some roads where we'll actually be heading out of the town situation and we'll be hitting the national limit. And you'll come back to me, we'll come back then, and we'll have a look at just how the car performs getting to that national limit. So, we're now waiting at the roundabouts, and we're now going to accelerate from the roundabouts onto an A road. We're already at 30, 40, 50 and 55. We can just ease off on the accelerator gently. So all we had to do was just to accelerate or rev the engine to around 3000 RPM, hold it at between 2.5 to 3000 RPM, and that is enough to take the little Micra 1 litre up to the national speed limits safely, comfortably, and without too much noise or fuss. Now let's have a little talk about trim levels. So this particular example is the SE. With the SE you get electric windows, air conditioning, power steering. You don't get the rev counter cluster. That's been retrofitted by myself at some point, which is why the mileage is almost 100,000 more than the car has actually covered. And you also get a couple of sort of nice internal features, you get nice seats, etc. Although the seats in this one are from an earlier generation, because it seems that the facelift coil pack seats get very, very grubby and it's almost impossible to clean them. So at some point before 2015, this car had the complete interior, certainly the seats, changed for an earlier model. According to the brochure, the 1 litre engine that this particular SE has was actually an option. Certainly for certain model years, I think the 2000 model year, it was Nissan's intention that all SEs should have the 1.4 unit. So the designation for the 1.4 is CGA3DE. CG is the series of engine, so it's clean and green. A3 is to differentiate it from CG13, which was the 1275 unit. And obviously DE is double overhead cam electronic fuel injection in Nissan parlance. The capacity of this little engine is 998 cc's, which is, funny enough, identical to the A series, the A Plus unit used in the Mini Metro. And indeed, the 1275cc version of this engine, again, identical cubic capacity to the A series. And if I recall, 1348cc was a typical sort of capacity that you would tend to see on A series engines that had been either stroked or bored out. So I do wonder if the all aluminium engine in this particular car shares its origins with the A series. I do believe that Nissan did copy or license the design of the A series for some of their first cars, so it wouldn't surprise me if you could sort of trace the lineage all the way back to them. The car itself, this particular example, is actually more powerful than the original Micra, the original K11 1 litre. The original K11 1 litre developed just 54 brake horsepower. The coil packs added a very useful additional 6 brake horsepower, taking us up to between 59 and 60 brake horsepower. Peak torque is 60 pound-foot of torque and is developed at around 4,000 RPM. You certainly find if you rev the engine and hold it at 4,000 RPM, acceleration is far from sparkling, but it gets you there a little bit quicker than you would have if you were just driving normally. Motorway driving, it does okay on the motorway, it's not terrible, it will get you up to speed, and for the most part you can quite happily sit between 65 and 70 miles an hour. I'll be honest, because I'm, in my 40s and not a teenager anymore, I haven't been trying to wring every last bit of performance out of this car just to see how fast exactly it will go, but it tends to, if I'm sort of accelerating on an empty motorway, it will run out of puff around sort of 85 miles an hour, an indicated 85 miles an hour, which on this particular engine and speedo is probably about 80 miles an hour. It will run out of puff on an empty stretch of runway at that particular speed. So I am led to believe. I'll be honest with you, I haven't tried it myself, but speaking to other coil pack owners with CVT transmissions, that seems to be the general consensus, is you're going to get pretty much the indicated book top speed, and that's your lot. But to be honest with you, it will sit very happily at the legal limit, which is 70 miles an hour. As I said earlier in the video, if it was recording, that is, it does get a little bit wearing after sort of 200 miles or so, so you do need to have, as far as possible, you do need to have a few sort of regular brakes thrown in if you are going to be taking your Micra on a particularly long journey. The air conditioning does certainly help, to be honest, it really does help with keeping sort of the cabin nice, cool, and pleasant place to sit. And also the seats, although quite thin on the squabs, they are quite comfortable. On the whole, not bad at all. Oh, there is a police car coming, so we're just going to pull over, and hopefully the horse that's in front of me won't kill anybody. Seems to be okay, so we're just going to gently coast past the horse and actually just let the momentum carry me on idle. And there we go, the horse is gone. Phew, where was I? Yes, motorway and motorway driving. Yeah, so the seat squabs are a little bit thin, you could say, but you don't get an achy behind, and I do sometimes suffer due to my height, due to a slightly sort of bad back, but in all honesty, in all truthful honesty, it's really not that bad. It's not a bad place to be for longer journeys. Anyway, coming up to the end of the video now. It's just a really sort of a little quick drive out in the Micra. I'm sure you guys were sort of keen to see what the little beast could do. Not a huge amount, but it's a fun car to drive in summary. It handles with relative enthusiasm and poise, and it is perfectly acceptable as a little commuter, or indeed a car to take further afield. Anyway, I'd like to thank you all very much for watching. If you have found this video interesting, don't forget to hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to hit the notification bell and do all the other stuff that the cool YouTubers tell you to do. And thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.